Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM. This is a show where we just hang out and chat and talk about gaming, games that we love, game reviews, game design, adventures. Next week, we're starting into our exploration of building out a hex crawl and a dungeons, multiple dungeons, set within Jackals. And one of the things I'm going to do there is I'm going to walk through how I built tables, how I used triggered events, how I used fixed hexes, random hexes to sort of build a sandbox for the players to engage in. And hopefully at the end of this, we're going to have new spells, new magic items, an entire valley of hex crawl, several dungeons, new monsters, and hopefully that'll all get packaged together with thanks to the iconic production chat and patrons, and hopefully that'll go up for sale sometime next year. But today we are starting the first of 3 parts on horror. Now this was actually brought up last year as we were going through fantasy and through our science fiction look, and I don't think I want to take 9 episodes to talk about the experience of horror, but I really think we could break down horror into 3 broad genres and sort of talk about them like that and how to get in through games on that. So I tend to break up horror into basically 3 broad substrata. There is personal horror, there is existential horror, and there is noetic horror. And these, I'll explain each of them, and they sort of correspond to different emotions and different places within our respective being. So personal horror is horror that threatens the body, not the self, but the body. So these are things like slasher movies, great examples of personal horror. They instill fear in us. We're going to talk a little bit about body horror today, personal horror, how to bring that up out of at the table. And I think personal horror does a really good job of invoking the revulsion. It's really good at bringing up revulsion in players. It's really good at bringing up fear, because we can, in some way, understand, at least intellectually, what personal horror or threat to our own body is. We'll come back to personal horror. Existential horror is sort of the Lovecraftian horror, the cosmic horror, the horror that threatens the mind, sanity. It is the revelation of things so far beyond us that our very concept of our minds breaks down. We cannot see the world the same way anymore. We are bent, we are twisted, we are shattered in comparison to this horror. And this creates a sense of terror that sometimes is hard to get at the table. We'll talk about that next week. And finally, noetic horror, which is probably, in my opinion, my favorite type of horror, but probably not the kind that we actually see very often. And this inspires, I would call, dread, because noetic horror is the horror that threatens the self, the soul, that which would live beyond us. And we'll talk a lot about why I feel like that genre of horror used to be much stronger and now has faded away. And while there's still some good examples of it, it is not nearly as pervasive. We still see some things in King. We still see some things in Arthur Machen. Obviously, Dracula being one of the key examples of this, but going all the way back to Greek myth. So we'll talk about those other two, but we're going to focus today on personal horror. The horror that's the threat to you. The slow, staggering slasher who implacably chases down your friends, coming for you eventually. Oh, my brain just died. Guy who wrote The Fly, or directed The Fly, known for his body horror, just had another great piece come out. Chat, I'm sure you'll help me with this. Apparently I need more caffeine this morning. Surgical horror, things implanted in us. Cronenberg, thank you, Grom. You get a possibility for that. Yes, David Cronenberg is the king of body horror. The shifting, the changing, the snapping, the twisting, the strange implantations, the strange effects on our body. This is something that Cronenberg can that's the word I like when I describe body horror, the visceral reaction. In our Savage Worlds Deadlands game, that moment that the blood tick forced its way down one of the characters' throats and they began to choke and gag on it, there was an instant change in the atmosphere of the game. There was this sense of a violation of personal space. There was a sense of the violation of self, but really it was more of a body horror because we can all, even though we've never had a blood tick force its way down our throats, our bodies have a built-in sense of right and wrong, if you will. And we have all experienced that sensation of choking on something, and so our brain starts to fill in all of the pieces. This is body horror. This is personal horror. The loss of autonomy, the loss of self as it relates to our body. A silly one that I adore implicitly is the Evil Dead movies, right? Where the evil got in my hand and it went bad, so I cut it off with a chainsaw. But that point of that hand, that body being disassociative, being no longer part of us, being something other. These are things that instill deep senses of unease and and revulsion. I'm going to go back to revulsion. Yes, John, the blood ticks. And again, I'd like to apologize. That was that one moment where I'm like, oh, a blood tick. I've got an idea of what that is in my head. And then as I'm reading the description of the creature real time, I realized what was in my head was not what I had expected. Right, and the cure being the castor oil. Andre, yeah, that was just well done to whoever designed the blood tick. You get this sense of personal horror. I think in a lot of ways, one of the strangest legacy components for many modern gamers, going to the roots of the hobby, are the cursed item. The cursed item for me instills a sense of personal horror. The helmet that won't come off, the sword that you can't put down, yet continues to lash out at friend and foe despite what you want it to do. This loss of autonomy in the body, or the severing of the body, or the corruption of the body. These things instill a sense of personal horror that I will say is, they instill a sense of fear that is not as removed as the other types of horror in gaming. For example, if you're playing Call of Cthulhu and you're like, oh, no matter how well you describe the eldritch horror that is coming through the angles of the room, there is a disconnect, and probably a well-deserved safety disconnect, between what I am describing and your character's loss of sanity. We don't know what the loss of sanity feels like. Even Lovecraft doesn't describe it very well, right? People pass out, they run screaming, they, mechanically they incur phobias or fugue states. But if done well, personal horror leaps off of the character sheet and lives in the mind of the player. It's one of the reasons why most horror games come with, hey, know your players, know your limits, talk about these things. Because, hey, if you're playing with a group of friends, your goal is not to get them to, vomit at the table. A younger, less wise JM in college was once asked to go as dark down the rabbit hole of a World of Darkness game as he could, and I had several people who refused to play with me anymore because of the body horror that was incorporated into that game. And I do not blame them, and this is why, no matter how many times people want me to go, as dark as you can, I'm like, no, we're friends, and that's not really what anyone's. Yes, I would say that Vecna's hand, there are cursed items that fall into these other categories as well, Padre, 100%. The Helmet of Alignment shift is definitely existential horror. You are no longer who you thought you were, and now forced to act in a different way. Your mind has been changed. And yes, the Hand of Vecna, any good corruption item, imperils not just the body and the mind, but the eternal destination of the wielder. In a lot of ways, Stormbringer is one of those kind of iconic horror items. I really feel like Stormbringer in the Elric series, one, he is the true villain, as he declares after killing Elric and stealing his soul, but that's one of the tragedies of Elric. There are many times where he puts down the sword and walks away, and yet the temptation, the desire, the lure brings him back. So, how do we get these reactions at the table? One, make sure your players are okay with it. When we did the Deadlands game, it was like, hey, this is a game of horror. I know most of you really well, but just, is there anything you guys don't want to see come up? I did the same thing in our tour game, because Tharcold is really all about body horror, which is probably why I like it so much. And there are certain people who are like, hey, listen, no eye stuff. Like, perfect. No eye stuff. So it's always good to just set a quick baseline of, again, you don't want to gross out your players to the point that they don't want to play anymore. And also, I think personal horror is probably the easiest one to overdo. Just think about horror movies. The difference between a good slasher film and a campy slasher film. It tends to be measured in the gallons of blood that they use on the screen. Love Sam Raimi. Evil Dead 2 Army of Darkness stand kind of in opposition, and Ash versus the Evil Dead versus the original Evil Dead, or some of the other slasher films that are so near and dear to my heart. Grom has said, no accordions, but pianos are okay. See, this is just all good stuff to incorporate. I'm actually really looking forward to Savage's Horror Companion coming out. I just downloaded the PDF and looking forward to looking through that, because I feel like a good horror companion will cover a lot of these. So what are good books for looking at horror in gaming? Well, first of all, the GURPS Horror by Kenneth Haidt is just brilliant. The 3rd edition and the 4th edition. If you need just a generic book on horror and how to run it, I doubt that you can find a better guide than Kenneth Haidt. I would highly recommend checking those out. You can get the PDFs pretty cheaply. Hey, hello, Rook. Good to see you, buddy. And thanks to Rook's generosity. Welcome to our subscribers, Restar, Tinker Hellraiser, Peg, Grom, and JD. Good to see you all. So, that is one of the key things. Make sure you're talking with your players, and make sure you don't overdo it. The other thing to think about with personal horror is this idea. So body horror people get. Things crawling under the skin, things crawling in the spacesuit. If you remember the horror episode that we ran of Fading Suns, the feeling of things where they should not be is really creepy to us. The sensations of being touched, being, wind blowing on the back of your neck, something crawling inside your shirt. These are all things that we as humans have a baseline reaction to. We are familiar with these phantom sensations. The fact that if I am talking to you about a bug, a spider crawling inside the back of my shirt right now, and how it itches, many of you are going to have the same visceral reaction or the phantom sensation of creatures crawling on you. So yes, this is something we can use as game masters wisely and responsibly to increase the level of tension in our games. But let's not underestimate both the usefulness and the guardedness of using this corruption of self. The personal horror of evil getting into the hand and having to cut it off with a chainsaw. There is something about even a momentarily loss of physical control of the characters that causes a deep unease in the player. And I think I've talked about this. Horror, one of the best techniques for horror is the fact that there are, in general, two inviolable rules of gaming. I am in control of my character, and the GM tells me the truth. The GM is the eyes, ears, all of the senses into the world, and I control what my character does. Horror is sort of predicated on both of those inviolable truths being a little bit more bendy. And we'll talk a lot about perception when we get to existential horror. The prairie tick. Yep, that thing is great. The earworms from the Wrath of Khan is, ooh, man. That is burned into my mind. John Doom, yeah, the Babelfish. Think about the first time we get a glimpse of the xenomorph in Aliens. The first two times are both personal body horror. The thing latching onto someone's face, the ovipositor going down the throat, everything seeming fine, until John Hurt's amazing scene where the xenomorph pops out of his chest. That thing is so visceral and so well done that even today it is one of the most terrifying scenes that we have in cinema. It's brilliant. And we could talk about why that scene was so done. Actually, let's talk about that. So we talked about these inviolable rules and how in horror there's sort of this understanding that these two rules have to be bent in order to get into the feel of the mood of the game. And John Doom, yeah, that's exactly it. Ridley Scott hired television actors who are used to big open stages and built the inside of the Nostromo to pull out panels so they had this claustrophobic feel. And then, yeah, they had no idea that first take was the take that he planned to use. It was a build as a, hey, we're just going to run through, there's going to be some reactions, and they got full animatronics, full blood spray, everything. According to stories from the set, the nurse who screamed and passed out actually screamed and passed out and woke up and attacked Ridley Scott. Justifiably so. Like, in the moment, for her, that terror was real. There's a reason why I would put that original Alien scene up against many of the scenes that we have in modern cinema today for the emotions and the outpour that it actually brings up in us. So, cursed items that cause a player to lose control of a limb or a weapon. That fear that forces them to run away or pass out. These are things that are very powerful tools, and again, should be used to heighten the mood, not in a way to punish a character or to punish a player, or to push a player so far outside of their comfort zone that they are not happy to be here. So, if you want more inspiration for body horror, I highly recommend Clive Barker. If you can handle it, Hellraiser, the original, the second one, and the new one, does a really good job with body horror. In fact, I would actually and noetic horror, but we'll get into that when we touch on noetic horror. In fact, I would argue if you enjoy Hellraiser, if you enjoy that genre of movie, check out the new one on Hulu. It's way better than it has any right to be. David Cronenberg's films, The Fly. This really, I'm going to toss it out there. It is campy. It is awful. It barely rates a B movie. But I love the source material, and Mark Hamill's in it. Wears the same outfit over 3 days of the film, so it's just thoroughly enjoyable to me. The movie The Guyver, based off the anime. There's this one scene where Mark Hamill is turning into this cockroach creature in kind of a Kafka-esque manner, and it is probably the highlight of the movie for me, especially when he's like, "Kill me" at the end, because I feel so bad that Mark Hamill had to do that movie. But it's key for this idea of body horror. Yes, John, The Fly. Man, that movie. And then Cronenberg has a new film out. I haven't seen it yet, but it involves body horror and art and cannibalism and organs. It's on my list to see. So that is our discussion of personal horror. And again, I'm relating personal horror. A lot of people would define it different ways. These are my definitions of personal horror. And so we're talking about body horror today. Next Thursday, we're going to delve into existential or cosmic horror, the loss of sanity in the face of the world. Again, we're going to talk a lot about, just know that I'm going to couch all of these on, listen, I don't run horror games if I'm not running them with friends. Mainly because sitting down with a bunch of people I don't know and trying to run a horror game raises my anxiety insanely. I really want I want to know the people I'm playing with when I'm running a game like this, so I know where the walls are that I can work within. Grom, the original series is great. The Guyver movie, it's campy, and I love it. And I love Guyver 2 Dark Hero. I'm just bio-boosted bio-boosted body armor. Yeah, I don't know. The zoonoids, all of that just really, I think I found it at exactly the right time, because I was watching the TMNT movies, and then I watched the Guyver movie, and the zoonoids and Bebop and Rocksteady, they're just inexorably linked in my head, even though they should not be. So, Tinker Hellraiser, thanks for joining. You like existential horror. Excellent. I can't wait to chat about that. Yes, John, there has to be an explicit agreement of trust between the players and the GM. You have to explain, hey, this is a game that involves horror. Here is the type of horror. What are lines we don't want to cross? I have a very simple set of questions I ask when I run Mage for people. Because here's the other thing, if you don't talk about that and everyone shies away from it, I think that's why Vampire the Masquerade as written is a game of horror and politics. Vampire, the way it's usually played, is blood-drinking superheroes of the night, because the horror needs to be internalized in that game, and very few people, I think, are ready or who play that game, at least in my experience, really embrace that. They wanted celerity and potence and obfuscate and go on from there. So, we will be back on Tuesday. We're going to start our journey into the Valley of Troikus. I am really excited to have your input as I start designing this new hex crawl for Jackals, and then we're going to be talking about horror again, and then I've got some interviews that I'm hoping to do live on, or to do on behind the screen with fans of the show, other GMs. We kind of just talk about gaming and move on from there. So if you like what we do, please subscribe here on Twitch, follow us on YouTube, leave a comment. I try to get back to everybody. Or join us on our Patreon at patreon.com/iconicproduction. Get some rewards. We get videos and have a great Discord community online. So, also, I've been in contact with most of the group, and it looks like in February, early February, we're going to be back with our second part of our Savage Rifts adventure. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to John reprising his role as our Rockstar Cyber Knight. So, until next time, hope all of you have a wonderful week. Tomorrow, if you are watching this live, which is on the 12th of January, on the 13th of January, we're finally going to get to see what the official OGL 1.1 is, according to some of the leaked documents. So I'll probably have something to say about that early next week. So, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and this has been an Iconic production. We'll see you all later. Have a good one.